Hi everyone, welcome back to the Vak Podcast. I'm Utkarsh.
Namaste, I'm Sumedha, a historian and a writer, author.
Wonderful. Firstly, folks, thank you for the extremely positive and, for me, rather inspiring response to the first podcast. I think we have about 4,000 views already. A lot of people have reached out to us, and a lot of people found it helpful. So I think, at least for me, that was very encouraging. That it kind of encourages us to do more of this. Okay, so this is going to be interesting because this is going to be on a topic that a lot of people have asked about, and honestly, something that's on my mind as well. This is all about understanding a little bit of the reality of Indian history and some of the Indian customs without some of the distortions that came in. And really, number one on that list is the caste system, right? That is pretty controversial. It is, in the modern context, it is almost exclusively perceived as negative, right? For me, the way I want to look at it is I don't want to make any assumptions, right? I don't want to assume it's negative, it's whatever. There are certain, certain aspects that have been glorified and called out as extremely negative. So I'm not going to go there. What I'm going to ask somebody who has the knowledge is two or three things. Firstly, what was the original intent of the caste system, right? How was it designed? Why was it designed? Was there any benefit in the design? Was there a purpose behind it? This is a question that a couple of listeners have asked me to ask you as well. The second part of it is tell me a little bit about the journey. So, what happened, right? What was the original intent? How did it get changed? It would definitely have gotten changed over time through everything that happened over the course of history of the last few thousand years. So, tell me a little bit about the journey of how we got here. And thirdly, I specifically want to deep dive and touch on the most controversial aspect, which is untouchability. So maybe you could just start us off with the original intent.
Thank you, Utkarsh. I'm so glad that you've picked up a topic about which all of us talk all the time, and many of us don't really know anything much. So, what was the original intent? Is something I'll answer in one word: organization. It was organization of society. It was classification of society, not just society, it was classification of the cosmos. So, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra are not people who are born in certain clans or families. It is a classification of the entire universe. So, to give a small example, even soil is classified in one of the four Varnas. The soil is definitely not, it's not, it doesn't even have any life. Ancient Indians like to make sense of the universe. They made sense of the universe through observation, through understanding the properties of what they observed, and then classification. So, if you translate this onto people, society, how did it happen that this Varn system came in? First thing, the Varn system is theoretical.
Could
It's
I
not.
just stop you for a second there again, just for somebody like me? What do you mean, or what do we mean by one? If you
Yes,
could just
I'll
double
come to
click on
that.
that. Yeah,
I'll come
yeah,
to that. Just remember, it's theory, okay, not
yeah.
practice. Now,
Okay.
I'll go back to telling you how we went from what was actually observed and seen and classified to this Varn system. So, for that, I will start with Kul, Jati, and Sampradaya. Kul is the family you are born in, extended family, not the nuclear family as we think of now, but the extended family. That is, say, your clan, the Scottish clan, something like that, the Kul.
Yeah.
The Jati is a big group of people following the same occupation. So, again, remember the word occupation, it is very key for understanding both the Varn system and its distortion, which is called the caste system. So we've reached a group of people who follow the same occupation and who live together and who do the same thing. That is Jati. How does this segue into which God you follow? What we call in English or in Christian terms religion. So that is through Sampradaya. In the last podcast, also, we had spoken of Sampradaya, that these were the different gods and goddesses that you thought of as the ones you revered. You could be a Shakt, you could be a Shaiv, you could be a Vaishnav. Within these also, there are so many other Sampradayas, and all of them had their own ways of worship, their own rules and regulations about everything. So this was how it was managed at the real grassroots level. What do we pick up here to understand the so-called caste system, we become Jati. Jati is an occupational group. There are innumerable Jatis. There were innumerable Jatis all across the subcontinent, and even more, during modern times, it was up till Afghanistan. So these Jatis followed the same occupation. They lived in the same way. They had certain customs. They tried to intermarry, rather intramarry, but there was also intermarriage. I'll come to that a little later. So this is what perhaps we understand as caste, but that does not solve the problem, because then what is Varna? What you have been mentioning, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, that is not Jati, that is Varna. So what is Varna? Varna is a theoretical system of 4 large divisions into which all these Jatis are supposed to fit in. Please note what I'm saying. They don't really fit in like a perfect puzzle. They're supposed to fit in. How does this work? So there is a Jati of, say, agriculturists in Bihar. The same Jati of agriculturists, say, in Karnataka. In Bihar, those agriculturists become very powerful. They then say that we are not Vaishya, we are Kshatriyas. They then say, no, we are not even Kshatriyas, we are Brahmins. In another part of the country, those same agriculturists are not so powerful. They don't have that much of a status. They remain Vaishyas. So what am I hinting at here? Mobility. Mobility. Each Jati changed its position according to its specific situation. I don't know whether you would like another example. Would it help if I give you another example spanning, say, 2000 years?
I think that will be helpful. So just to get my understanding a little bit better. So Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, these are not Jati, these are Sampradaya. Is that, did I
No,
go
no,
get
no,
it?
no, 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 no.
Okay, that's why I wanted
Because,
to.
yeah, so
So you
Sampradaya
said there
is
were
who you
multiple
worship.
Jati. Yeah, go ahead.
Sampradaya is who you worship.
Okay.
So, as a Kshatriya, you can worship Devi and be a Shakt. As a Brahmin, you can worship Devi and be a Shakt. So, these are different levels of understanding. I wanted to explain how this segues into Sanatan Dharma, because all of these different jatis have different ways of living, have different gods and goddesses who they worship, but these are mediated and these are unified through the system of sampradayas and through the system of certain basic understanding of Sanatan Dharma. That is the topic of yet another podcast. But right here, Jati is the basic unit which we are talking about in real life, although there are also, sub-jatis. The example I was talking about, I am a Kayas. So the Kayas say that they were born from Lord Brahma's son, Chitragupt. He had 13 sons. So there are 13 subtypes of Kayas. All of them have a very strong identity of their own. So if there is an Ambasht Kayas, they would not like to marry a Shrivastav Kayas or a Karn Kayas. Now, if I want to talk of these jatis and sub-jatis in terms of caste, it is just not clear. Is my caste Kayast? Is my caste Ambasht? Is my caste Srivastav? I am not clear about it, and neither is the government of India, neither is anyone, because caste is a category which has been created by someone who came in from outside, as it was the Portuguese. For us, it has always been the Jati Varna Parampara. And Jatis were, they followed their own occupations, they had their own groups, they did their own thing, and they were loosely classified into Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra, and they moved up and down as their circumstances permitted. I'll give you a small example of Kayas.
Just to double click on that, right? So I understood better now what you meant with Jati. So that's great. As you said, there are not just, I mean, the four are like, rough consolidations of the multiple Jatis that exist. Understood that. Now, Jati is then, the way you described it, the way I took it, then is that by birth. So say a Jati is whatever, Kayas, they may identify or a Kayas from a certain part of India may at one point identify as Kshatriya, or maybe later they identify as Vaishya, making it up. But then your jati, that is determined by birth then, right? Regardless of
Okay.
where the overall jati moves.
Okay.
Right. So basically,
Okay.
let me put it this way, right? In any family, everybody doesn't do the same thing, especially nowadays, right? Somebody could be a lawyer, somebody could be a sportsman, making it up. So then professionally, different members of the same jati, so to speak, same family, are in different occupations. So how do we reconcile that? Or just want to understand a
Yes.
little.
So don't mix the past with the present, Kushu. Utkarsh, we are not living in the theoretical times of Varn or Jati. Right
Mm-hmm.
now, the whole thing is a huge mess, which we will talk about later. But
Yeah.
let me give you this very good example from the Rig Veda. So there was a king who was a Kshatriya. His name was Devapi. He is mentioned in Mandal 9 of the Rig Veda. And his son was called Shantanu. Don't confuse him with the Shantanu we know. This was a
Yeah.
Shantanu who became a Purohit. So he became a Brahman.
Mm-hmm.
So this kind of thing was very much prevalent. It was according to what you did. And therefore, we come to the crux of the matter, which is that Jati, as it was theoretically thought of, or Varn, as it was theoretically thought of, was not dependent on birth. I repeat,
Okay.
not dependent on birth, not rigid. It was an open and fluid system. So, if we go back into the Vedic and the Upanishadic age, I can give you many more examples. So, you will find examples in the Shatpat Brahman, you will find examples in Taittiriya Brahman of this kind of movement and differences of the occupations of individuals and therefore their caste. So, it is not birth based in theory. In practice, what happened, especially say 1000 or 2000 or 3000 years ago, is that children did follow the occupations of their fathers. Not always. Think of Ved Vyas, or think of Valmiki. They were from communities of fishermen and communities of dacoits, but they became Brahmins.
Okay.
So,
So just to confirm that, if someone's occupation, traditionally thousands of years ago, most people followed the same occupation of their families. But if their occupation changed, then during the course of their lives, their jati also changes. Is
yes. So,
that
I'm
okay? Okay,
giving you
that's
an
an important
example.
part.
I gave you this example from the Rig Veda. So, the older the period, the more fluid it was, the more the changes that happened. Slowly, it became, it would, I would say, till about say 500, 700 years ago, or maybe 1000 years ago, it was no longer that fluid. But I wouldn't even say that the system became closed, because even though an individual would not carry himself out of a jati and create a new jati, I will come back to what I've been trying to give the example of, that is the kayas. So
Yeah.
you meet them in the 4th century for the first time in Gupta inscriptions, when they are scribes and accountants. Then they remain scribes and accountants, but they become more and more powerful. Then you come down to Warangal in Andhra Pradesh, say in the 11th century. There is a Kakatiya queen, Rudramma Devi, and her father, Ganpati. So they have a very strong Kayas lieutenant. So he becomes stronger and stronger, and soon he makes himself a king. So this Kayas, who was a scribe, this Kayas community, now becomes a Kshatriya, a king. Time passes on. In the 19th and 20th centuries, the British are there. Certain rules have changed as far as castes are concerned, and in modern India even more. So what do the Kayas do? First, they say that no, we want to be Brahmins. They do a court case. They fail. Then some of them go and say, no, no, we are Shudra, because they want the benefit of reservations. They fail again. So can you see how complex and fluid is the history of one particular small group
Hmm.
that I'm telling you about?
Yeah.
And examples like this abound. Therefore, we must make the point that caste is not by birth. Would you like me to tell you what is the theory behind? And I'm sorry, let me just change what I said. I should not use caste, varn, and jati as interchangeable. They are not interchangeable. Caste does not mean the same as Varn and Jati. So I actually want to tell you two things. How was Jati or Varn decided? If not birth, then what? And if caste does not mean the same thing as Jati and Varn, what does it mean? So both these things I think are important. So would you like me to go ahead with this?
Yes. In fact, that's exactly what I was going to ask. Go ahead.
Okay. So the first thing, if not birth, then what? So if you read the Bhagavad Gita, and you will find many people dissing the Bhagavad Gita a lot, because there is a particular shlok in it which says that you should uphold Varnashram Dharma, and it should not be confused. And if this Varn system is confused, then society will become disorganized and it will fall into ruins. So that is seen as a casteist shlok. And along with the Manusmriti, the Bhagavad Gita is disallowed. If you just bother to go on a little ahead and read chapter 18, then chapter 18 will tell you how that Varn system is to be actually put in place. What are the things that have to be seen? What has to be seen is your gun, which is your values, your properties, your skills, and your karma, that is your action. What do you do? So, what are the three gunas across the cosmos? They are sattva, raj, and tamas. Sattva is truth. Raj you can think of as force, and tamas is something which is dark, something which you don't want. All of us have all these three. Everything in the cosmos has all these three. It is the balance of these which defines what we are. So a Brahman will have the Sat Gun as foremost. A Shudra will have the Tam Gun as foremost. And after that, what do these people do? It is dependent on their actions as to whether they will be called Kshatriyas or Vaishyas or Shudras. So the theory of caste is not birth-based, rigid, and exploitative. It is all about what qualities you have and how you use those qualities. That is how the theory of caste, again, sorry, this is
So
my
theory, I was going
Western
to say theory
education
of Varn.
speaking. The
Yeah,
theory of Varn. This is my
yeah.
Western education speaking. That is how the theory of Varn works.
Yes.
And this is something which really, really needs to be understood. See, what we see around us is, if my father, mother, they were Kayas, so I am a Kayas. So you feel it is birth based. And then you feel I cannot change my uh, caste at all. So obviously it's rigid. None of these things were true as the system visualized itself. So now I'll come to what happened. What is this caste? So when the Portuguese first came into India, they saw a system of organization. They could not really understand it because they did not understand either the language or the people or anything. So they thought it is the same as their casta. Now their casta was a race-based, color-based social organization where the whites were at the top, and then all the mixed races, depending on how light their color was, came below those.
Could I
That
just
was
pause you there? What was that word? Casta.
Casta,
Is
casta.
that a
It's a
Portuguese word?
Portuguese word. Yes. And
Okay.
indeed,
Okay.
it refers to color. It refers to race. Our Varn is a system of classification with no reference to race or color.
This is ridiculous and fascinating. The word caste itself is okay. I didn't know it had a Portuguese origin and deriving from a Portuguese system. Wow. Okay, go ahead, please.
So then they assumed, they thought, well, it must be the same as us. You know, the Portuguese were very, very cute people. They went into a temple and saw some people praying. So they thought, yeah, this is Jesus Christ, only a little different. And, you know, the people are also a little different, but they must be praying to Jesus Christ. So in that way, they just kind of extrapolated their own experiences. Therefore, they called it the caste system, and they put in a lot of racial characteristics into it, and they put in color, and they put in the color of the skin, which was just not there. So this is how the word caste came into being. Then you have, even the invasion of the Muslims, which happened around the 10th, 11th century. It broke up a lot of the social fabric, and there were a lot of forced conversions, but the system did not completely break down. It still existed. And even till, the 16th, 17th centuries, the Indian intelligence and the Indian genius, they were producing and creating a lot of intellectual capital and a lot of things that we can still use. For example, calculus. We must do a podcast on calculus. The Kerala School of
Yes.
Calculus. We must do a podcast
Yes.
on that. So, what happened when the British decided that now this country is ours? We must understand and run it the way we want. So, they decided to do a caste census. So, they wanted to know which caste do people belong to.
When was
So,
this?
this was the first one was in 1871.
1871. So
Yeah,
relatively recent. Okay.
yeah.
Even in
It's
the
pretty
context of the
recent.
British Empire.
So, what
Okay.
you see now, everything is, you know, legacy. A lot of it is legacy. So 1931, of course, was their last caste census, the Brits, after 1871. So what problems did they encounter? People did not know. They asked, okay, what is your caste? They did not know. So some of them would say what their jati is, say, I would say Kayas. Another person would say, no, Ambasht, which is a subcaste of the same jati. Another person would say, no, my caste is Punjabi. Another one would say, no, I am a Kannada. Another one would say, my caste is Bihari. So do you realize how many different categories are being put into the same basket? Why is this so? Because there is no definition of this caste system. Varna,
Why were
that,
they, just to ask a question, why were they even attempting to
oh,
do
this
a
was for
classification?
their understanding and this was
Okay.
for helping them to administer things well. See, India is really, really, really diverse and huge. So how to deal with these people who are doing different things? And remember, district collectors had to adjudicate on a lot of social and personal and cultural matters also. So how to understand all that? This was all, and you should sometimes read those gazetteers that they produce. Those gazetteers are really detailed as far as they can understand whatever they can observe, they put in those gazetteers. This was an attempt to understand and to rule. And also, once they found out certain fault lines, which there always are in big societies, there was this attempt to exploit those fault lines and to make those cracks bigger and bigger and try to break up the country. So they succeeded pretty well. They did divide along religious lines. They tried very hard to divide along caste lines. There is something called the Dravidian theory. There is something called the Aryan Dravidian divide, and we must do a separate one on
Yeah,
that.
I mean, just a small tangent. I was completely unaware of it till about 6 months ago, and when I started looking it up, I was just shocked. That's definitely something we need to do.
Yes. So, that depends on the Aryan invasion theory. So, according to the Dravidians, all North Indians are invaders from God knows where, some unspecified place. And they are the original inhabitants, and we have exploited all of them for God knows how many years. So, there's a lot of utter rubbish like that floating around. And of course, we'll deal with it. But to
Yeah,
come back to the British, so they did this caste census. They came up with nonsensical results and they themselves kept scratching their heads about it. But now, once they'd done it, they had to go on with it. And what was the very important thing that it did? It froze categories. So if today you said, I am a Vaishya from the Agarwal Jati, there you are. That's it. Next 100 years, you can't change. There is no way of mobility up and down, nothing, because the government has strictly written down this is you and this is where you belong. You dare not move, we will not let you move. This was the biggest disservice that was done to Indian social organization through the British census, because the very nature of this system, which kept it as an open, fluid, and more or less equitable system, because people could move around it, up, down, right, left, that was stopped. Add to it the fact that it was the work of the Vaishyas and the Shudras, which was totally disrupted by British colonialism. So, the work of agriculture was absolutely killed through over taxation. Then
yeah,
things like
especially by
textiles, things
government.
like pottery, artisans, these
Yeah,
were smashed by importing factory made, industry made goods into India and not letting people produce their own things. So, what happened? There was a huge part of India which was thrown into poverty, and complete kind of, they had no hope. They were a hopeless and completely poor, poverty ridden, unhealthy, very, very terrible situation for them. Then very cleverly they came up with this idea that it's not our fault, it's the caste system. It was the Brahmins who have been doing this to you for thousands of years. And you know that narrative really well, Utkarsh. I don't need to tell you. Let me give a few more statistics because I think it's good for people to know statistics.
Absolutely.
And to find out the source of those statistics. So these same British gazetteers, they also had lists of who was studying what in the village schools in the 19th century and turn of the 19th century into the 20th. So all four of these Varnas used to study in the village schools. There were about 50, 60, 70% non-Brahmin students in these village schools, including Shudras, Vaishyas, and Kshatriyas. So does that tell you that Brahmins had stopped the other caste from being educated? That Sanskrit was some kind of purview only of the Brahmins? No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all. And another, of course, this is another lie that Sanskrit was, one, they say it was not a language. Two, they say if it was a language, then only for the Brahmins. It was not accessible to anyone else, which is a barefaced lie. Now, where am I getting these statistics from? There is a very nice book called The Beautiful Tree by Dharampal. And for all of you listeners, it's very easily available as a PDF on the internet. If not, you can also find it on Amazon. Read that book. It's about education in India around the 18th, 19th, and early 20th centuries, and how it was at the local level. There was a very fixed and good system of education for everyone, and how this was broken in the early 20th century or even in the 19th century by the British, because the village schools were run by the village using certain resources of the village itself. Those resources were taken away by the British, and the village schools were forced to shut down. And then they said that these Indians are uneducated, they had no schools, we'll set up our own Western schools. And then they said, first woman to study in a school was so and so, first Shudra to study in a school was so and so. All lies, complete lies. I've given you slightly contemporary data, but if anybody is interested, there is also such information for the past. You can read plays of the 5th, 6th century of Bhavabhuti, where there are co-educational gurukuls, where there are gurukuls where boys, girls from all Varnas and Jatis study. So now actually, we are buried under a weight of lies. And sometimes I cannot even breathe thinking about the amount of lies that we have to kind of counter. So are these things clear? Caste as a category introduced by the Portuguese and made rigid by the British. Varn and Jati not being birth based but gun and karma based. And I don't know, would you like to get some data from the modern Indian state post 1947? So it's
Yes,
very,
we'll get
it's
it. Yeah, we'll get into that. So again, this is quite a bit to take it, even for me, right? I'm just trying to distill it down. So my understanding, and I'm just going to confirm it with you. This is my understanding based on our last 10 minutes of conversation. Firstly, sorry, I'm forgetting the word again. What was the word that you said? The
Kasta.
Sanskrit. Huh? No, not
Kasta.
kasta. Caste and kasta is easy to remember. The Sanskrit word.
The Varn.
Varn.
Full,
Yes.
full Jati Sampradaya Varn.
Yes.
Okay, Varn.
So,
Varn system.
firstly, right, that entire equating jati and varn with caste is a complete invention, right? Caste,
Yes.
the idea of caste or casta
Yes.
is a much later concept, and the distortion that this concept did was it put very mobile, very occupation based or individual based, honestly, if you look at it, it's not even birth based, right? It's individual by individual based classifications, because the original intent of this was classification as a rigid birth based classification based on their existing structure of understanding, which
Correct.
was, so they had to find a way to understand it. So people always put new things in a structure that they can understand. It's human
Exactly.
nature, right? Secondly, then, in order to manage a country as complex as India, they needed to classify people and this was the go-to because this was a simplified way of looking at it. And once done, it was just self-reinforcing, because obviously if you've put in as any organization, right, East India Company or whatever, if you've put in all that effort into a certain classification, you're not going to rip it apart. And we see this all the time in large organizations, right? Certain things are just the way they are because that's what the way it's been. That stone was set in motion a long time ago.
Yeah.
Right. And then, as any good person in a position of authority would do, when you have certain things that are happening, whether you're disrupting something or you're creating negative outcomes because of your policies, for whatever reasons, right? As a good example is, you need to find the demand for the industrial revolution that is taking place in your shores. You've got this huge market, huge population in India. So you disrupt completely, obviously, the local. It's kind of crazy. You kill the competition because you own the market.
Yes.
Yes. and then you blame it on something else. It sounds natural, and to be honest, it doesn't sound fictional to me. It sounds very, very natural. That would be the natural thing to do. You are somebody, you're not a manager, I don't know, whatever they were called in the East India Company. It's a stock, it's a company owned by shareholders. You're trying to maximize shareholder return. So it sounds very, very plausible, and frankly, given what the data that you're citing, seems like pretty much that is what happened. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it'll just take me a moment or two to process it, because at least for me, through my education, through my exposure, it has been so ingrained to me that what the modern aspect of the caste system, it's birth-based, it's highly discriminative, it leads to all sorts of things, consequences in terms of electoral politics and all of that. Yeah, it's just shocking, honestly. I am frankly just taken aback.
Since in this podcast we will encourage people to learn for themselves, there is a school of research which is called the Ghent School. The Ghent
Can you say that again?
Ghent School, Ghent, Ghent,
okay.
Belgium. So the Ghent School is led by Professor S. Bal Gangadhar, and he has a team of very good researchers and social scientists with him. They come up with a lot of books on these subjects. So I would encourage you to read all of them. Jacob de Roover, Prakash Shah, there are so many of them. Please, for this podcast, read a book called Western Foundations of the Caste System, edited by Prakash Shah. And to understand the Western gaze on us, read the book by S. Bal Gangadhar, which is called The Heathen in His Blindness. So this will give you, and they write in a way which I appreciate a lot. They have a lot of data, and they have a lot of very solid facts. It's not, my opinion against yours. You think this, I think this. That's also okay in its place. I like to know the opinions of people, but real facts, evidence, and data, especially when you have to counter lies which have been spoken for 300 years and continue to be spoken today, you need hard evidence to convince people. Please read these books.
Absolutely. Okay, you were mentioning something that you wanted to talk about.
Yes,
which
so again, in terms of data, let's look at what the Indian state did. So this particular Indian state, Bharat, that is India, came into being in 1947, and wholesale, lock, stock, and barrel, it adopted these ideas about caste, forgot about Varna and Jati, and it said, this is how we are going to organize everything.
So the motivation for that was expediency. The easiest option is to continue what's running.
One is that Utkarsh. The other, I think, is a deep, deep lack of self-esteem and a total, you've read, I don't know if you've read Memory's work on colonization. When the colonized person completely takes on the values of the colonizer, thinks of himself or herself as valueless, thinks of their values as absolutely bad and to be rejected, and it is only the colonizer's values which have any importance, and those are the ones which should be implemented. This is what we did in 1947.
I understand that intent, but I'm just looking at the dates here, right? So 1947, and you said the first caste survey was 1871.
1871.
So the folks that are forming the constitution, they are at least
they are looking at Utkarsh, the 1931 caste census.
Okay.
In 1947.
Correct, but there is a living memory in their families, maybe one generation up, maybe two generations up, maybe something their grandparents told them of the original thing, of the original Varn and Jati system. Is that not something that folks are influencing now that they have a clean slate? Let's just get things right, or is
Yeah,
it just
so Utkarsh, you were born much after 1947. Your mind is a clean slate. You don't suffer from low self-esteem. You don't suffer from this feeling that, oh my God, I am this very horrible Hindu who must actually expiate for all the sins done by my forefathers, because that's what you were taught. That's what you were taught. I mean, it was kind of forced onto you, forced inside you, that whatever you have done, especially, and this was, remember, the background is that this was only for Hindus. This was not for anybody else, which itself is wrong, because as a system of social organization, this kind of system is there in Christians, it is there in Muslims, it's there everywhere. But for Hindus, it's a different matter because it's their original way of social organization. So Hindus were taught that there is no religion as bad as Hinduism. There are no people as bad, as immoral, and as terrible as Hindus. They must expiate for thousands of years of all this. Now, all these are very easy to say. If you ask them what thousands of years of exploitation, there are very few answers. There are no answers.
it's very impressive
And when
what
you
propaganda?
ask me about untouchability, I'm going to tell you what went on in the Constituent Assembly.
Let's. That is the perfect segue. Unless you had something else to
No,
complete.
no, I just want to tell you this little thing
Yeah.
which I'm
Yeah.
every time getting distracted from. So,
Yes.
in 2011, there was an attempt to do a caste census. Okay, I'm saying it's an attempt because it was a very poor attempt. And so, what happened? 330 million households were surveyed in 2011. So, how many castes do you think should have come out of these 330 million? So one would think, in the hundreds, maybe in the thousands. But the number of categories of castes that people spoke of were 4.6 million separate different categories of caste. 4.6 million.
So every okay, 90 households per caste, roughly. 80
Yeah.
something. Yeah. Wow.
So no. If you just divide it, only 72 households use the same phrase to identify themselves. 72 households.
Okay. Yeah.
So suppose you take 5 people per household or even 6 people per household. How many does that make? 500 people per caste. In a word, ridiculous. Something more. There were 81 million errors in this data. 67 million they rectified in some way. So 14 million errors still exist in that data where 330 million households were actually surveyed. So what would you, as somebody who looks at data, how useful or how valuable would this kind of data be? It would not be at all valuable because it seems error ridden. There are obviously, some kind of basic errors in the questionnaires, in the definitions, etc. How can you have 46 lakh or 4.6 million castes in India? So this is to show you the ridiculousness of the classification of castes as it is done. So we
Yeah.
want to segue on to another part of
Yes.
the podcast. Yeah, tell me.
Yes. Untouchability. Right. So two or three things. So one, was there a jati or one or a profession that required an untouchability practice to begin with? That's the first question. Before we even get into how all of these concepts are confused up and bundled up in the caste system. That's number one. Number two is if a practice like that did indeed exist, right? Then wasn't that just the fact that it exists, regardless of the fact that whether you can get into it or out of it, isn't that pretty uh, discriminatory to begin with, right? You wouldn't, I mean, today with the modern sensibility, you wouldn't say that, hey, you work making it up, you work as a sewer, whatever, right? Handling garbage or whatever it might be. We don't think of anybody like that, right? We separate the profession from the person. So how would you look at that? Look at this.
Okay. So, this untouchability, as a researcher of ancient India, it really puzzles, perplexes, and baffles me because I don't find any mention anywhere. In the definitions of, or in the understanding or the classification of different jatis and varnas, There are very detailed classifications, and in fact, their definitions, such and such is a Brahman, such and such is a Shudra. There is no definition, no mention of anything called untouchability. So, in theory, there is no justification for it. It does not exist. Number two, now as far as practice, or as far as the theory of it is concerned, you remember last time I had spoken to you about the moral outrage of sati. This
Yes.
is again something, the moral outrage of untouchability. Where did this first come into being, this idea of untouchability, or the idea of there being a section of people who were outside society? From our usual suspects, the British. So what did they do? They looked at society and they said, okay, there is something called caste Hindus, and there is something called others. These others were called many things. They were called untouchables. They were called depressed classes.
Why were
Gandhiji
they?
called them Harijans,
Why
like
were they
that.
others to begin with? Why did not have?
Well, it was their idea. Remember, I told you that there was a huge section of society which was in a very broken and very depressed and very poor state, because their traditional occupations had been completely taken away. They had been pushed into joblessness, unemployment. There was no agriculture. So, what to do with these people? So, they were called depressed classes.
So
And a
because of
lot,
these, so then they themselves did not have a self identity of this is Jati or this is my what. They didn't have
of
that
course
because of
not. And Utkarsh, you may say that, oh my God, this person is a Harijan, or this person works in the sewers or cleaning sewers. Do you think today in Delhi, if you try to take away the right to clean the sewers from the particular jatis to which it belongs, you will have a riot on your hands? Because
yeah.
that is the work there they do, and it's very, very lucrative, and they don't want to give up that work. They don't think of themselves as some humiliated XYZ kind of person. It's people like you, me, and caste theorists who come and say, oh my God, look at these people, how demeaned they are. They do not think of themselves as that. Let me give you a small interesting thing. Suppose two families are getting married. What are the kind of gifts which are exchanged? The right to collect garbage from these 10 apartment houses. Those are the kind of gifts which I exchange, because it is extremely lucrative. So this is our own some peculiar kind of westernized idea. And again, this idea is not there in our theories about this kind of segregation and demeaning of anyone. This idea is not there.
Just to push on that a little bit, and again, this could be an incorrect understanding, but this is something I do come across. Do you not have cases of Brahmins or quote unquote other high caste where there's, oh my God, I or stories or a thing that, hey, I Shudra came to my house, whatever happened, where does that come from, right?
So that comes from a lot of, I don't know, that comes from a lot of media rubbish. For example, Utkarsh, I mean, you and I are related. However, you give me a glass of water from which you have already sipped, I will not use it. Because we have this whole concept of hygiene and jutha. So suppose you are my relative. Suppose a friend of yours is there in your house and he gives me a glass which he has already used. I will not use it. So you can very well then pick on me and say, why are you doing this? And suppose that person happens to be of some other caste. You will say, this comes from your caste identity. Does it? It does not. It comes from my idea of hygiene. This is just a small example to tell you that a lot of different things are kind of lumped together. Again, it is said upper caste and lower caste. What are these? What are these? These are only what the government says so. Because there is a huge group of people in India, there are millions, many of them are starving, but they are scheduled castes and they are poor and humiliated only if they are written in the 1200 scheduled caste list. Otherwise, you can be as poor as you like, as depressed and humiliated as you like, nobody cares. Is your name in that scheduled caste list? If so, you are depressed, you are humiliated, you are demeaned, you will get government benefits. Otherwise, you can die in a gutter, nobody cares. So, what's the important thing? To be listed by the government. So, it is the government which has become the biggest creator, arbiter, disseminator, classifier of caste. Why do you see every day new and violent demonstrations? We want to be in the scheduled caste list. Look at the Marathas of Maharashtra. They are one of the richest, most powerful groups in Maharashtra. They want to be in the other backward classes list to get government benefits. So today, it is nothing to do with what you are. It has everything to do with how you are classified by the government. And again, it's not organic. I told you there were movements within society which were organic. This is not organic. This is one bureaucrat Babu sitting somewhere says, you are a scheduled caste. There you go. You get all these benefits. Another one says, you are not. Finished. You are not. Also, suppose I am not from the scheduled caste, but I'm smart enough to bribe the person concerned and get a certificate. So I'll get a certificate, I'm a scheduled caste, and I'll get all the benefits. So you see, it's become something completely different. And it is connected to the way that untouchability was created, because it was created by the British in their administration. So they just had this caste Hindus and these depressed classes. Again, in case any of our listeners is interested, there is a long detailed article by Jacob de Roover on this, which details the discussions in the Constituent Assembly, the lack of any definition of untouchability, the lack of any hard evidence that A, B, C, D groups are actually untouchable. It was just, some kind of thing which was taken to be true. There are untouchable groups. We will put them in the scheduled list. And those people who we put in the scheduled list will by definition become untouchable, or will by definition become depressed. Now, there are many stories, especially if we go to Tamil Nadu. So they'll say, no, there are people, you don't let them use the same wells. You don't let them enter those temples.
Correct.
Now, temples, for example, temples are not, it's not a mall where anyone can go and buy devotion. These temples, again, I come back to Sampradaya. They are run by Sampradayas. And those Sampradayas have rules of their own. This, a very important thing that happened a few months ago, a Sengol or a Dand was established in the Indian Parliament. And you had some Adhinams or Mathadish who came from Tamil Nadu. So everyone must have assumed they're Brahmin. They are not. They are what the Indian government defines as other backward classes. So you see, definition by the government and actual practice, this is a completely different thing. And how do you define people as untouchable? Nobody knows. Are there any strict criteria? So in any country, anywhere, if you wish to do some positive discrimination for a particular group, you define them. You say this, and this must be there. But for untouchability, there is no such definition. You have court cases where the judges have said, no, this is a case of untouchability. But sorry, we can't define it. We just know. So unfortunately, this is what the problem is. We all know. There's no definition. There's no evidence. And there is a lot of confusion around it from the lawmakers. But we all know. And the media, academics, unfortunately, contributes a lot to it. So in the media, you will see SC girl, whatever, something happened to this ST boy or this ST girl, and upper caste Brahmins exploit this and that. So if you actually go and see who did what to whom, you will possibly not find Brahmins. You will just find two groups of jatis fighting with each other. And one of them gets labeled as the aggressor and the other gets labeled as the victim. The aggressor in the modern Indian state is always, but always, the Brahmin. There are calls for Brahmin genocide in this country now because the kind of hate that has been generated through false reporting. If you take, for example, NCRB data, so they tell you that such and such a thing was done to a scheduled caste. Fine, that's a crime, atrocity. Who did it? They don't record. So it could have been his neighbor who wanted to get his property and so attacked him, but it will be recorded as an upper caste crime against a scheduled caste. That is a very big problem with the way the data is collected. And if we have time later, I will also tell you some very interesting things about NCRB data and the way caste atrocity has been created and constructed. There is no hard data. It is mostly soft data. You'll get very good write-ups on this in that book, Western Foundations of the Caste System. And if we have time in the end, I'll give you some hard data about this. So untouchability is something which has been created. And things like, I just got a little carried away by a lot of things, but let me come back to it. That temple entry, for example. Now, temples are built by, I belong to a sampradaya, I revere Shivji in a particular form, I built that temple. There are certain rules for it. It's not as if it's not an amusement park that anybody who wants can come. There is a certain manual for it, which is called the agam. Those agams are the rules and regulations for that temple. So there are many different temples in which many different people go or don't go. And do you think that all temples are controlled by Brahmins and they keep untouchables out? Absolutely wrong. Everyone, all kinds of jatis have their own temples. All kinds of people. For example, Vishwakarma, you would think of them as scheduled caste today. But they're some of the most skilled and self-respecting people. They have their own god, Vishwakarma. So it's all a skewed lens. And it's as if a temple is an amusement park where everyone must go in. And if you can't go in, then you start shouting discrimination. Whether it's not even as if people want to go in for devotion, it's just proving a point. Now, water wells, because that's another very important one. That some people are not allowed to use water wells. Now, this is water has always been a scarce resource. It has always been controlled by groups. To locate the reason for these fights over water in caste is a construction. That is a construction which has been made with intent, especially by the Tamil Nadu government. Because there is no way of locating these issues in caste from the past. Today, after 1947 and with the British intervention, caste is Varna is lost, Jati exists to some extent, and caste is a monster that has taken over everything. So all this rambling, untouchability, no definition. Untouchability, no sanction in any Indian scripture.
Yeah. So my understanding, which is from this, so as you said, right, untouchability, especially today, is essentially what the government chooses to classify who's what. Right? That's the first thing.
Yes, all kinds of practices.
And a lot of different communities are rallying to become untouchable because it comes with all the certain benefits, preservation, and so on and so forth. That's understandable. And what I also understand is that untouchability, or rather this caste discrimination as a concept, has become this useful ghost, or rather concept that you can blame a lot of things on, right?
Yeah.
It's like, for me, if I liken it in the US, not that I'm an expert in the US, but I see a lot of things in the US are based on institutional racism, which may or may not be the case, right? It's just a convenient thing to fall on, right, for a lot of things. So I understand that. What I don't understand fully, so I understand, right, once there's a thing out there, okay, any violence, it's caste, it's a very convenient thing for the media to use, and you just propel a narrative.
And not just caste, Brahmins.
Brahmins,
therefore, the level of Brahmin hate in India has crossed all limits.
Yeah. So what I want to understand is, for me, this makes sense, right? Over the last, say, 50, 60, 70 years, post-independence, all of that. But when the constitution was being formed, when India became independent, clearly there were enough people who felt that they were getting discriminated against as untouchables, right? As you said, the practice did not exist. There is no practice originally. But then there must be some experience of people that they feel that they're getting discriminated against by Brahmins, etc., which is what led, like someone like Ambedkar, for example. So was it really the case that, I mean, was it isolated incidents that was amplified by the British, that somebody doesn't want food cooked by someone else, somebody doesn't let someone enter their house? What is the origin of that?
So for that, Utkarsh, I think we'll have to go back to seeing how the British wanted to control India. Now, India has always been a knowledge civilization. Brahmins have been the knowledge givers. They are the holders of knowledge. And again, remember, not by birth, but by action, by study, by actually, inventing things or understanding things or writing about things. The Varna system, the Varna Jati system was very, very strong, and it withstood the attempts of Christian missionaries to convert people wholesale. So there was a great attempt felt, a great need felt by missionaries to break the society in some way. And you should read the correspondence between missionary groups and the government of India. So what the missionary
What is the economic incentive for the East India Company? Or I understand the missionaries want to convert people. Fair enough. That's what they're trying to do.
No, so let me complete my sentence.
Yeah.
So therefore, they created a lot of atrocity literature which did not exist, sent it to the British, and the British accepted it. Why not?
Okay.
And for us, 1947, we took it all over lock, stock, and barrel. If Meenakshi Jain writes about Sati and tells you that it did not exist, equally read the Ghent school on this so-called untouchability, read Dharampal on so-called lack of education. So these were attempts. Remember, we are not on a clean slate here. We were a colonized country, and the colonized country was proving a tough nut for missionaries to crack. Look at the countries that they have colonized in Africa. Any of the indigenous religions left? No, none. Latin America, none. So Hindu society was able to withstand it because of its inherent strength. So it was like a, I don't know, like a net. So it was not so easy to break apart. And it had lots of linkages. But it was important for them to discredit, destabilize, to demean, and to say all kinds of bad things about Brahmins and about the existing social organization of Varna and Jati, so that Hindus would begin to reject it. Once they reject it, they are easy pickings for missionaries. So do not underestimate this. And most of the literature that we read, we rely on has come from missionaries. Look at the Northeast. There was a Christian missionary called Verrier Elwell. He had the year of Nehru. So he said, just cut off the Northeast because they are very delicate tribes. Don't let anyone go in, otherwise people will make them Hindu. But let missionaries go in. See the result today. The Northeast is majority Christian population.
But why would Nehru
Except
agree to
Assam.
that?
Why did?
Why did Nehru agree to that?
Well, it's his birthday today. I wish his ghost would appear and I would be able to ask him. Nehru did a
Oh, it's
lot
today
of
the
very
14th of
stupid things
November.
like this.
Oh, yeah, it is 14th of November. Yes, it is his birthday. Children's Day.
Yes. So don't ever forget that some things which you dismiss or would like to dismiss as conspiracy theories actually happened. We know this because we can read books and correspondence between the concerned persons, and they say so in so many words. Hindoos, Hindus were a kind of, very despicable category for them simply because they wanted to make them Christians. And there are libraries full of books by missionaries on this.
Yeah. I mean, not just that, right? If you read any contemporary literature from the late 19th century, right? Even if it's nothing to do with anything, but whatever reference you see to India and Hindu is double O, important to say that. It's interesting. It's like, even if you read like Jules Verne or even Arthur Conan Doyle, some of my favorite authors, right? So it's like you can see, I mean, whatever you say, I'm nodding along because when all the contemporary literature that I have read is just novels, late Victorian novels. Yes, I can see that is the perspective. So yeah, that makes sense to me.
So Helen Keller. I was a great admirer of Helen Keller when I was a girl, and then I read her opinions on Hindus, and I have never been able to look at her or think of her in the same way again. They have spewed venom and dislike and disdain on us for nothing, simply for existing. And I'm afraid it's again it's a topic which really bothers me because I've grown up reading English books, European books, studied in the Western epistemological system, and just had a lot of disdain heaped on me, and it's stifling. So this is my way of digging up from under all that weight of lies.
Yeah, no, I think that's true, and reality is that ultimately the perception, even if it's a wrong perception, if it's pushed for long enough, sometimes perception becomes reality. So everybody's, so whatever the original intent of I don't want to say the caste system because it wasn't the caste system of Varna or Jati was. Today, it's a very different understanding. It's a very distorted understanding, right? Yeah, but it's important. I think I'm going to try my best to distill this almost hour-long conversation at this point to easy to digest ways to understand this ultimately fact-based reality of what it really was. I think this might be a good time to also get into a few specific viewer questions, or is there something else that you want to cover?
No, I think specific viewer questions would be good. Although I did want to just mention the positive aspects of caste, I'll do it in 30 seconds. as the talk
You can spend
show
longer.
head.
It's okay. It's a podcast. You can spend as
Okay,
long as you want.
it's not a TV talk show. The TV talk show heads
No,
will
it's
say,
not.
okay, 30 seconds only.
No,
So,
no, no, not at all.
one of the big things about social organization as Jati and Varn, it was the way we thought of our society. So, upholding Varn, Ashram, Dharma, and aspiring for the four Purusharths is a one sentence description of Hindu society. What were the positives of caste? What were the positives of actually not caste again? We keep using it, of the Jati Varn system. One was the strength of your local community and your clan. Those links were very, very strong. So they gave you a lot of social support, psychological support, and family support. It was something which we miss today. We don't have that kind of support. We are all floating electrons and we meet up with other floating electrons on the way. So that's the psychological and social. The other thing is, say, economic. So caste clusters are a very big thing in modern India. Caste clusters are those who have got together and created economic miracles in small towns such as Sevarudanagar or Sivakasi, where the textiles or fireworks, of course, the fireworks industry is more or less dead now. Or you take anything, electricity, electric cables. So people of one caste have no trust issues. So it's easy for them to lend money, to loan money, to help people along. So this has been the economic angle of caste clusters. And there is a lot of trust. The third thing which I want to say is transmission of culture. And the fourth thing I want to say is transmission of skills. So there are so many things which we would have lost but for these Jati traditions. A dead or hitherto unknown Shakha of the Rig Veda is being again revived because there is a family which has been transmitting it across generations for thousands of years. Then you have, special designs of textiles or special ways of jewelry making or the ways in which you construct a temple. So these were skills, and skills were imparted very, very well through these jatis. The death of jatis has meant the death of many, many beautiful, wonderful skills that we already had. So this is in short, and perhaps you can read a book by R. Vaidyanathan, Caste as Social Capital. That will give you some of these ideas with data.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, classification is required, right? Ultimately, for large groups of people to coordinate with each other, to trust each other. I mean, there's nothing wrong with organization. I mean, everything that we take for granted in the modern world is organization. A company is an organization, a department is an organization. And especially if you provide the not the clarification, but really the it is a clarification, right? It is not a strict birth-based prison for you
No,
to be into, but this is really
exactly.
skills-based,
I'm glad
occupation-based.
you use that word prison. It's not a
Yeah,
birth-based prison. True.
yeah. So
But
again,
we
it's just
must
like
add, I must add that the Jati Varn system as it was envisaged does not exist any longer. It's
it
now that
doesn't.
monster called caste.
Absolutely correct, right? So exactly, it's dead. It's dead because ultimately a concept is what people understand of the concept, and the
Yeah.
concept that exists is the very
Uh,
yeah. Go
no, I
ahead.
have something to say about that. It's not dead organically. It has been killed, murdered by
Yes.
different administrations, the colonial administration and then the modern Indian state.
Yeah. Well, it's not completely dead. At least we know about it. I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that people that has been killed over the years we don't know about. As an idea is still alive if one person remembers it. So that's great. But this is also for me then a good. This there were two viewer questions. I realized that you just answered the first one. This was from Shweta, and she said, "I'd love to understand how it began, assuming there was a rationale, and what, if any, were the benefits of design." I think you just answered that right now. So thanks. That's great. Hopefully, the answer is satisfactory. I mean, I'm getting a much better understanding now. There's a second one, and this is from Rishabh, and I realize this comes from a contemporary understanding, similar to my understanding, honestly, before this conversation. So I'm just going to read it out and would love to get your perspective. Uh, Tamil society implemented the idea of naming their children based on their father's first name and not the family name. By removing the family name, the caste would be less visible, and so would be the discrimination, as discrimination would be less visible. is this more effective than before, and should it be expanded into other communities? So I think this basically takes the understanding of the modern caste system, which is birth-based discriminatory, right? So I think we've really delved a lot into why that is a distortion of the original Varna Jati system. But I would love to understand if you have any knowledge of how this practice of this whole Tamil practice started, was the reason behind it, and your perspective on it.
Utkarsh, please don't get me started on Tamil Nadu and the Dravidian system. We must do a separate one on this. But
Okay.
this whole idea seems to be head over heels, because it's your family. Why do you want to give up your family name? Are you ashamed of your family? And let's say that caste equals to discrimination. Fine. You don't like it. I don't agree, but suppose it's like that. What's wrong with your family? Why do you want to dump your family? This is, again, the gentleman who has asked this must reflect. What is it that he wants to give up? Does he wish to disown his family? Does he wish to disown his group? What does he want to disown, and why? I hope that whatever we've said in the past has shown him and other people like him that Varna and Jati are not about discrimination. In fact, you can be proud of the things that your Jati did. If somebody is called Dvivedi or Trivedi or Chaturvedi, it means that someone put in those number of hours to study the Vedas. Dvivedi means he mastered two Vedas or she mastered two Vedas. And Chaturvedi means four Vedas. So somebody put in that
I had no
effort.
idea. Wow. Okay.
Why must you demean that person by saying, no, I will not call myself Utkarsh Chaturvedi. I will only be Utkarsh.
So
This
just
is
to, so I
the
think
hatred.
yeah. So I think just the intent of the question, right? By the way, this person is not familiar. I know the person, but I think the intent of the question, and perhaps a useful way to answer it is, right. So this question assumes, which was also my assumption earlier, was the modern distorted caste system, right? Not Jati Varn. We have clarified what Jati and Varn is not that. And for me, it's exceedingly positive versus the modern caste.
But Utkarsh, I have also told you that caste discrimination is something which is, highly exaggerated. If there's one event, it is tom as if there were a million. So, it's something which is caste atrocity literature has been built up for the past 200 years, and it's not based on evidence. So perhaps this discrimination can be recast in a vocabulary of competition for resources between
Sure,
groups.
sure. So the word, I mean, the assumption of discrimination based on caste, as you said, is a creation, right? For all the different factors and all the different parties involved. Clear. Do you have any perspective on how this practice started?
Which one?
The practice of, because even I notice it amongst my friends as well, right? So people from
Oh,
Tamil
so
Nadu.
this is that self-respect movement of Tamil Nadu.
Ah,
So,
okay.
self-respect movement and this anti-Brahmin, anti-caste, Dravidian movement. So our next podcast must be on that.
Okay.
And it is
Okay.
not just in Tamil Nadu. I know so many people in Uttar Pradesh who do not keep their last names at all. So what is the usage in Uttar Pradesh? They all call themselves Kumar. They are X Kumar, Y Kumar, Z Kumar. So it is an attempt to hide your caste identity. Why? Because you are ashamed of it. And this is the exact thing that I am attacking. There is no need to be ashamed of your jati or your varn. There is a lot that your ancestors have done that you should be proud of. If there are any things which are not to be done, don't do them. Why junk your identity? Just don't do it. If there's something that you found your grandfather or great grandfather doing which you didn't like, don't do it. Please junk what's bad. Keep what's good.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the starting point is understanding
Yeah.
the reality
I,
of
I
what.
also had a viewer question from Viresh Malik.
Yes,
He
go
had
ahead.
also asked about whether jati, or rather he said caste, whether caste is birth based or whether it is due to something that people do. So I think, Viresh, we have answered it pretty well in this last 1 hour. But if you have any more follow-up questions, please do ask either on Twitter or below this YouTube video, wherever, Facebook, wherever.
Yeah. It's wonderful. Honestly, there aren't many conversations where your perspective on something really changes, right? Especially when you're a little bit older, it's difficult to have those experiences. But for me, I think the past 1 hour or so has really been, I mean, I think it'll take me some time to absorb and do this because it is so ingrained, right? It is so ingrained, this understanding, that and just to get the reality of the intent, how it got distorted, and when you put the pieces of the puzzle together, it makes perfect sense. Particularly
So,
for me,
Utkarsh,
because
do you think we should put in some of the references that I have spoken about
oh, of
below
course,
the video so that anybody who wants to read can obtain these books and read?
yes, absolutely. So what
Yeah,
we will
so because somebody can say that I'm making this all up.
do,
You can say that I'm making it all up.
absolutely, yeah.
So, if you want some more evidence, if you want other people who have done more research, please do read all those books that we are mentioning.
Absolutely. So we will do that. We will put a list in the, not a thumbnail, the video description, all the references, all the places where you can access the references. We're going to do that. But yeah, so thank you. This was very helpful. We've got 2 or 3 topics that we need to cover after this. For me, there is math. I mean, the whole constant, the ancient Indian
STEM,
math,
all of STEM,
all of STEM, not just
all
math.
of STEM. Yes.
Yes. So there's that. There is the Dravidian bit that you seem to be very passionate about. I'm also
Yes.
interested to learn about it now. So that'll be a future episode as well. But yeah, I mean, for all of you viewers and listeners, if you have anything else that you're curious about, just comment. Or if you know me personally, just reach out to me. We are very
And
eager to.
I am also on Twitter at SV Ojha. Please tell me on Twitter what we want to. Utkarsh, should we start a Twitter handle for the Vak podcast? Maybe after some time so that
Maybe
people
after some
can,
time.
be there.
Yeah, I've tended to avoid Twitter for my sanity, but we'll see.
Yes, that's a good point. So
Wonderful.
thank you, Utkarsh. It's very good to know the questions that come from people who are, not researchers. So I live in a world of my own. It's good for me to collide with the real world at times.
Absolutely. And for me, I literally know nothing, right? And for me, I mean, personally, for me, I know a lot about many things. I know, like today, I was just guessing, I know all the Beatles song, but I know nothing about this. So for me, it's like, no, I need to
And
balance out
I
a little bit
don't
about
know
my
even
own life.
one Beatles song, okay? Not even one.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. So on that note, we'll end it here. We look forward to seeing you again in the next one. Thank you so
Namaste
much.
to everyone. Goodbye.
Namaste.